What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the Detroit Lions receiver position. And today, we're specifically talking about the Lions receiver they added this offseason in free agency, Tyrell Williams. So let's get it started.
Way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off, and we're going to stand up, and then it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down. And on the way up, we're going to take your other kneecap, and we're going to get up, and then it's going to take 3 shots to get us down. And when we do, we're going to take another hunk out of you. Before long, we're going to be the last one standing.
Welcome everybody to a video. Glad you guys are here. Yeah, we're talking a little bit about Tyrell Williams, the UDFA out of Western Oregon that has become pretty special in the NFL. Now, he spent time with both the Raiders and the Chargers, so he's also spent time with the Lions' new offensive coordinator, Anthony Lynn, which is a big deal, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But today I wanted to dive into some Tyrell Williams talk. Recently, we did the video on Brashad Perriman, and we may revisit that at some point as we get closer to the season. But yesterday, we were streaming some Madden, and someone brought up Tyrell Williams as a #1 receiver and where you would rank Tyrell Williams amongst #1 receivers. And that got me thinking today, and made me want to dive into it a little bit deeper and really try to figure out, okay, what is Tyrell Williams' role going to be this season? Because I'm fascinated by the way that he plays, because he's a very, very talented receiver that unfortunately due to injuries has kind of had his career derailed a little bit. But man, the guy got a payday at one point. But I wanted to figure out what is his role going to be, and the more I dove into it, the more I researched it, the more I started getting answers that I was like, oh, whoa, I was not expecting this. I mean, the initial idea for me was that the guy is 6'4", he's 200 plus pounds, he ran a sub-4 540, he's going to be an outside receiver, simple as that. But I wanted to dive deeper into it than just simply saying he's an outside receiver. Tyrell Williams had a very interesting path to landing with the Detroit Lions, and that's what I wanted to go through here. But at the same time, while we go through that, I also want to look at the production that he put up. So he dealt with some injuries, but he also had some fantastic moments, and he proved really what he could be. But I don't even know if we know that this is his ceiling yet, because the time that he had his best season, it was only his second year in the league. So as I mentioned, he was a UDFA back in 2015 out of Western Oregon, picked up by the Chargers. And he didn't have much of a role in his first year, but his second year, 2016, he got his opportunity to shine. And I don't think the plan ever was that, hey, he's going to be our #1 receiver. But when the opportunity came calling, oh, snap, he answered that door. He answered the phone call, whatever you want to call it. Because in 2016, in 12 games started, he had 69 receptions for 1,059 yards, 15.3 yards per reception, and 6 touchdowns. Fantastic season. Now, why did the opportunity come knocking, you may ask? It's because Keenan Allen had an ACL tear, missed most of the season, well, I think pretty much all of the season, and because of that, it was Tyrell Williams' time to shine, and shine he did. But I wanted to put this in perspective, and it's actually creepy how close these numbers are. But to put this in perspective, I compared it to Kenny Golladay, his second year in the league. Remember, Kenny Galladay's rookie season, it was a solid rookie season, no question, as a 3rd-round pick, but it was his second year that he took off. Golden Tate missed some time, Marvin Jones played in 9 games, so it was an opportunity for Kenny Golladay to take off and, prove basically what he could be, and that's what Kenny Golladay did. Kenny Golladay had 70 receptions, 1,063 yards, 15.2 yards per reception, and 5 touchdowns. But look at how similar those numbers are. Second year in the league, look how similar the numbers are between Tyrell Williams and Kenny Golladay. Tyrell Williams proved in his second year, Kenny Golladay basically proved to us in his second year, how fantastic both of these players could be. You could argue that Tyrell Williams actually had the better second season because Tyrell Williams only started in 12 games. He had 1 more touchdown, but the numbers are basically identical. I mean, it's creepy. It's a 1 reception difference, 4-yard difference, 0.1 yards per reception difference, and 1 touchdown difference. I mean, they're almost identical. It's creepy. But that was kind of like the, oh, snap, this is what he can do? Oh, that's what he can do? Oh, okay. Okay, now let me start looking at this guy a little bit differently. 2017, his role took a little bit of a step back. Reasons being, they drafted Mike Williams. The fact that a guy like Anthony Lynn would come in and be a part of drafting a guy like Mike Williams, while he already had Tyrell Williams and he also had Keenan Allen, it tells you that he had a plan for Tyrell, which we're going to get to in a little bit. Also, Keenan Allen came back and he was healthy, and Keenan Allen that season had 1,400 receiving yards. So yeah, I would say he took up a little bit of production, but still, Tyrell Williams found a way to be productive. Fortunately for Tyrell, he was dealing with a little bit of injury this season, but he played through it. That's one thing about Tyrell Williams that was never questioned, and that was his toughness. This guy tried to play through everything that he dealt with, and even though he did miss time with injuries, he tried to play through it all, and he played through the injuries that he was dealing with in 2017. He still put up a solid season. 43 receptions, 728 yards, nearly nearly 17 yards of reception. And remember also, this was the first year that Anthony Lynn took over as the head coach for the LA Chargers in 2017. Anthony Lynn came in and he started using him a little bit in different ways. So with the drafting of Mike Williams, who would play outside wide receiver, and also having Keenan Allen coming back and healthy and going off like he did, they adjusted the role a little bit for Tyrell Williams. And that's extremely important. We'll get to that in a second. But you can see he was still extremely productive, very efficient. You move forward to 2018, 41 receptions, 653 yards, nearly 16 yards per reception, 5 touchdowns. Keenan Allen had 1,200 yards. This was the year that Mike Williams, as you can see, with 664 yards, he started to take off a little bit. We'll go into what Anthony Lynn did differently with Tyrell Williams to find a way to keep him extremely impactful for that team in a second. But I want to continue to go ahead with kind of his path to the Detroit Lions. So here's where things got a little bit rocky. 2018 was his final year with the LA Chargers. It was his final year with Anthony Lynn. So he would be set to hit free agency. And luckily for the Chargers, they drafted Mike Williams, so they had another receiver with Keenan Allen. But Tyrell Williams would get paid some money. And I think it was very deserving. He got a 4-year, $44 million deal. Now, that's not just chump change. That was only $120,000 less what Keenan Allen was getting paid at that time. Raiders took a chance on him. They brought him in. Now, they changed his role back a little bit, which we'll get into. But in 2019, he, in 14 games played, had 42 receptions for 651 yards, 15.5 yards per reception, and 6 touchdowns. So when you look at those stats, they're not incredible, right? They're not incredible. As you can see, Waller was their top reception, so he wasn't really the top guy because Waller had 1,200 yards. But the stats aren't awesome. They're solid. They're not great, though. But what happened? Well, unfortunately for him, this is really when injuries started to play a factor. So he dealt with some injuries in 2017 that he played through. But 2019, we started to see it really be a factor because he dealt with a foot injury. And I can't exactly remember the name, but in the words of John Gruden, he said it wasn't getting much better. And apparently Tyrell Williams was taking medication before games to try to play through the pain. So the first 4 weeks of the season, he was playing. He had a touchdown in every single one of his games. He got his way back on the field, right? He didn't stay off the field, but he played through an injury. It was a tough break for 2019. But heading into 2020, you're hoping he's coming back and you're hoping that he's healthy. But that was not the case. He had a shoulder injury that he dealt with for 2020, and that caused him to miss the entire 2020 season. Actually, the word was that he was going to play through this injury. The word was he was going to play through this injury. He was going to give it a go, but that never happened. And he actually ended up getting surgery on this injury. So hopefully that means that he won't be coming back with this. It's actually very similar to Quentin Dunbar. Remember, Quentin Dunbar was dealing with his injury with the Seattle Seahawks. He had a really rough year after a fantastic season with the Washington Redskins before that, but he had surgery on the injury, so we're hoping that he comes back and he's healthy. Similar to what's going on here with Tyrell Williams. He had surgery. We're hoping that he comes back and he's healthy. Because of the time that he missed with the Raiders after signing that 4-year, $44 million deal, they ultimately decided to release him 2 years into his contract. And for the Raiders, it was really nothing hurt to do this because they only were going to take on $1.5 million in dead cap because of the way that his contract was set up. So for them, it wasn't like they were really losing money. If anything, they were just saving money, and they were dealing with a guy that had some time missed because of injury. So for them, it just made sense to release him. Why keep him around if he's dealing with these injuries? And now, as we know, he has landed with the Detroit Lions. Now, getting back to that production really quickly, because of the injuries and some time missed and, some bigger roles elsewhere, his production did go down a little bit, but he didn't become less efficient. And we'll get into that more in a second because it's going to be extremely important when you talk about the way that Anthony Lynn utilized him. When we look at his stats here at the bottom, I did want to put, as you guys can see, it says pace. I wanted to put what he would have been on pace for if he was still getting the same amount of targets that he got back in 2016 when he showed us basically, hey, I can be that dude. And as we can see, in 2017, he would have had 74 receptions for 1,250 yards, which is kind of what Golladay did in 2018. He got very similar amount of targets. It was his second year, and he just grew on that first year. You can see in 2018, he would have had 75 receptions for 1,190 yards. In 2019, 78 receptions for 1,200 yards. Now, that's, of course, assuming that, the numbers would have stayed the same, but that's just math. I didn't just pull those numbers out of nowhere. The numbers came from the yards per reception, the catch rate that he was catching at. So he was actually becoming more efficient as years went on. He was just getting less targets. He just wasn't getting as much production, but he was more efficient. So technically, if you go by the numbers, if you like math, which I don't, if you go by the numbers here, technically, he would have been on pace to put up those kind of numbers, which we would have been saying, oh my gosh, this is one of the better receivers in the league, which is ultimately why he got that big deal from the Raiders in the first place. But unfortunately for him, injuries really slowed him down. Good thing is that since he was released, the Lions were able to land a guy that they had connections with Anthony Lynn that is extremely extremely talented for a very cheap price. I mean, the guy's contract is really on the books for like $3 million a season, which is just fantastic considering the kind of talent that this guy has. This next part is what's super important. It is where we really start to dive into and figure out what is his role going to look like for the Detroit Lions and what could we see from Tyrell Williams this season. And that's what he said about joining the Detroit Lions. I know you can see it says Yak on the top. We'll get into that in a second. He says this: just knowing that familiarity with Coach Anthony Lynn and talking to Coach Dan Campbell and all those guys got me excited and fired up. And they believed in me, and I believe in them. Now, that's very similar to remember what Brashad Perriman kind of went through, right? These guys are believing in him. It's a new opportunity. It's very similar to a lot of moves we made this offseason. That's why I said in that Perriman video, he's kind of got the Lions mentality that we're going for, right? We're building it through the players that we're bringing in. But also, notice at the beginning how he starts off with knowing that familiarity with Coach Anthony Lynn. That's an extremely important part because he adds to that later without you even knowing it. But it's very, very important to mention that. But let's continue. He says this: it just seemed like a great fit. Okay, I mean, we're getting all the context clues here, and we'll get into it. I'm just excited to get going and be around those guys. And a whole coaching staff that's pretty much former players is a big reason why I wanted to come here. So apparently he likes the fact that we got all these former players. That's awesome because that means going forward, not only this season, but going forward, that could be a very big impact for the Lions to land some pretty nice free agents, to land some of these dudes maybe on better deals. I don't know if he passed up a different deal, but I'm just saying that seemed to be a pretty big factor for him. So hopefully that's a big factor for other guys as well. But that's a very big thing because for a guy like this, he not only gets familiarity with a guy in Anthony Lynn who started utilizing him a little bit different to make him even more effective, even though they were adding pieces, even though he was dealing with injuries, which we'll get into. But also he's now working with a wide receiver coach that is a former receiver that we know with Brashad Perriman had his best season. So for him, that's a very big factor to have those guys. Continue. He says this: I love being able to stretch the field. Now this is where things get important, okay? I love being able to stretch the field and be that deep threat guy. Of course he does. I mean, that's just fun. And when you think about Tyrell Williams, you're probably like me. You think of 6'4", 200 plus pounds, sub 4, 540. He's an outside receiver, and that's all you leave it at. But his role could be very interesting this season. It could be much different than that. Even though there's going to be elements to that, it could be a little bit different than just simply that thinking. But one of the big reasons I wanted to come here too, though, is they see me as being a guy that can run a whole route tree. All right, now that's important. So we say, look, I like being the deep guy. It's cool being set out there and just asked to go deep, but they see me as more of that. They don't just see me as a guy that's just, hey, run deep, stretch the field. They all see me as a guy that can run a whole route tree, can do basically anything that's asked, short, intermediate, whatever it's asked, corner routes, inside routes, whatever it's asked, they see me as a guy that can do that. So I like that they believe in me. It kind of takes me back to that. And then finally, he ends it off with this, probably the most important part, the intermediate stuff, the crossing routes, and all that. That was a big reason why I wanted to come here. I love the deep route too. I love catching those 70-yard touchdowns and 50-yard touchdowns. By the way, since he's entered the league, he has 4 75-yard touchdowns. That's tied for the most in the league. Pretty impressive. Being able to do both is going to be awesome. So that just section right there kind of gives us all we need to know. And then we can build off of that. Intermediate stuff. Crossing routes. So we know that's going to be part of his game because they told him that's going to be part of his game. Now let's add on to that a little bit because we got a lot of good information there. As you can see at the bottom, it says, some weird numbers here. We just got like some weird numbers. But what I really want to point out here is Yak, yards after the catch. Because when you talk about intermediate stuff, talk about crossing routes, that's where you see Yak being a very big part. Because it's not just, hey, catch it, here's where I am. It's being able to make plays with your legs. And one thing that Tyrell Williams is very overlooked in the category of his play is that he is very special with the ball in his hands. People think because he's just a big dude, he ain't going to be, he ain't make no one miss. But he's very special with the ball in his hands because he can get up to speed very quickly and he can be tough to bring down at his size. As you can see in 2018, 30% of his yards came after the catch, and same thing in 2018 with the Chargers, 30% of his yards. I put that in comparison to Marvin Jones, who only had 20% of his yards and 13% of his yards come after the catch in 2020 and 2019. And also you look at Brashad Perriman, same thing, 31% of his yards last season with the Jets came after the catch. So yes, it does have to do with what scheme you're in. But my point is that the Lions got guys that can make plays after the catch. It's going to be a very, very important part of this offense going forward. And you can see on the left side of the screen here, you can see fastest receivers. Notice the kind of speed the Lions brought in. Perriman, Williams, Ramian, Ratley, St. Brown, Hansen. All those receivers are guys that the Lions' new regime has brought in. They're all very fast. But notice who was left over. Guys like Allison, Cephas. Now, of course, we brought in our UDFAs, guys like that. But you can see they're a little bit on the slower side. However, notice Goff, yards after the catch, 5.8, 5.7, and 5.8 for the last 3 years. Put that in comparison to Herbert, very similar, 5.6, where Anthony Lynn was. And Stafford is all the way down at 5.1. Different scheme. You're thinking, he's 6'4", he's got good size, he's got speed. Why in the world is this guy playing that big slot position? Well, with Anthony Lynn, he went from playing slot 23% of the time in 2016 to jumping that up to 38% in 2017 and 43% in 2018. That was one way that Anthony Lynn utilized a guy like Tyrell Williams a ton. And that fits into exactly what Dan Campbell said this offseason. Remember what Dan Campbell said this offseason? We're going to be a matchup-based team. That's exactly how Anthony Lynn utilized Tyrell Williams. Tyrell Williams at the slot position for Anthony Lynn was just genius. It was absolutely genius. And I know what you're thinking, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you put a guy that's that big and that fast in the slot? That seems to be a waste of a spot. But it wasn't. Okay, see, in the NFL today, you have so many receivers. You're going to have multiple receivers. They had 4 or 5 on the field a lot. You had Keenan Allen, you had Mike Williams. So how do we get all these guys involved? You have Antonio Gates. What are we doing here? And he was able to do that. He got them all involved on the field. But you're thinking, why would you put a guy like Tyrell Williams inside? Well, like what the Lions are building right now at the receiver position, which I think is very similar to what Anthony Lynn had back with the LA Chargers. Actually, in a second, I'm going to pull up a chart and show you how I think each receiver compares to one another from both sides, is that the Lions have had a lot of size at the receiver spot. It's very similar to what Anthony Lynn had going on with the Chargers. He had a lot of size, so everybody could play inside, outside. They could all move around and play different spots on the field based on matchups, and that's where Tyrell Williams became extremely dangerous. He was the second most efficient slot receiver in the NFL. And he's not your typical slot. He's not Julian. Well over 2 yards per route run. All right. No, that sounds weird. Well, how does he have such a high yards per reception? You can get in his hand and he can make guys miss. He can run underneath, crossing routes, drag routes. And as you could tell, Tyrell Williams likes that kind of role. He likes being able to do that, not just be pushed outside and say, hey, go deep. They didn't even utilize this guy as a slot like Anthony Lynn did. And yet, he had Galladay type of numbers. He put up Galladay type numbers as simply being the outside guy that we think of him as. But all of a sudden, Anthony Lynn comes in and says, hey, we got Mike Williams. Hey, we got Keenan Allen healthy. We got to kind of find a way to be a little creative with you and figure out how we're going to utilize you because you're too talented not to be utilized. So they started playing him as a big slot based on certain matchups they would go against. His efficiency went through the roof. That's what linebackers ain't catching a 6'4" guy that can run a sub 4.5, and it's tough to tackle him for safeties. I don't care who our number one receiver is. You can call whoever you want, call it Khalif Raymond. I don't care. And they're able to dominate teams based on matchups. If one game Tyrell goes for 400 yards, the other game he doesn't go for anything, I don't care as long as we're winning. That's what it is about winning. It's in the words of Dan Campbell. We're going to be a matchup-based offense. That's what they did. Good luck with that. They weren't even utilizing it, and he put up Galladay numbers. And that's exactly what Dan Campbell says. We're going to be a matchup-based team. This is your definition of a matchup nightmare because he became a matchup problem because teams couldn't figure out how do we match up against this big dude, play inside and he could play outside. So when you're asking yourself, what is this role going to be this season? This is how I view a Tyrell Williams role. Is looking at the Z receiver position and also a mix between big slot. I think he'll be a little bit of both. So I know what you're thinking. What the heck is a Z receiver? You may be thinking that. You may know what it is, but I wanted to explain it in case anybody doesn't know because I had to learn it as well. The Z receiver spot is the spot that plays kind of this flanker role. He's the opposite of the X receiver. A lot of times he's known as the number 2 receiver. He plays a lot of times on the side of the tight end, but a lot of times he plays off the line of scrimmage. And the reason he does that is to keep the tight end eligible, but it also allows him to motion. And because he's able to motion, that allows him to run those drag routes to crossers, play way more over the middle. And it also doesn't have him play against press as often. The Z position is what I think he'll play a lot because it makes him a lot more mobile, where they can move him around amongst the field, make him a matchup problem. And of course, he'll get his reps, as we saw from Anthony Lynn, 44% of the time. He'll get his reps at big slot as well when they have that matchup. That's what he gives you. And he also gives the ability to play X receiver because an X receiver, who is usually known as your number 1 receiver, and this is why I didn't want to talk about whether or not he's the number 1, because who cares if he's the number 1? The fact is, can we be effective moving the ball down the field? And it's about matchups game by game. Who has the matchup? Is it St. Brown? Is it Perriman? Is it Tyrell? Who has the matchup in this game? That's who we're going to attack over and over and over until you prove you can stop it. That's exactly what Anthony Lynn built with the Chargers, is versatility between his receivers so they could all play different spots. An X receiver is exactly what you would picture if you're thinking of a guy like Tyrell Williams. An X receiver plays really well off the release. Why? Because an X receiver is on the line of scrimmage. They don't motion as much, but they play on the line of scrimmage. So they are very vulnerable to playing against press coverage because there isn't that yards between them. So they have to have that top end speed to obviously be able to get over top. They need to have quickness to beat the cornerback, and they got to have good size. He's got all of that. He plays extremely aggressive. He plays very physical. So you're thinking that's the obvious role. But for Tyrell, it's going to be all three. However, the big slot is where he's going to be very, very dangerous. And you can just see by some of the clips. The guy's route running is incredible. At one point, he was averaging 2.8 yards of separation per route run. Okay, now think about that for a second. 2.8 yards and he's 6'4". He's already got a matchup because the thing is, the problem with the big slot is that the big slot, the idea is, hey, they're too quick for a linebacker and they're too big for a safety. So how do you match up against that? And he's getting separation. He's a tremendous route runner that has great hands. He catches everything with his hands. That's how Tyrell Williams is going to be a matchup nightmare for defenses because they can put him outside, let him play that traditional go deep because he has that speed to do it. If you don't focus on him, he's going to run by you. But even notice in some of his biggest games, there was a game where he went 4 for 4 for 132 yards. All of his deep routes were from the slot spot because the slot position does not limit you to have to be short, but it allows Yak. That's where he thrives because he's special with the ball in his hands. He really is. But also, he can run deep from there. He can attack the middle of the field. He's a big threat. It almost like makes him kind of a hybrid of a tight end and a Z receiver. That's kind of what a big slot is. So because of that, he gets a little bit of best of both worlds. And he can play every spot. That's why he's a matchup problem. But then you ask, okay, well, what does that leave for everybody else? This is where versatility kills. And this is what I'm showing you on the field right now. You see how it says roles? And we'll probably dive into this for individuals later. But this is kind of what I view as the roles can be for each player. This is a comparison directly to what the Chargers had when Anthony Lynn was there. Keenan Allen, what's the comparison? I'm comparing him to St. Brown or Cephas, being able to play that similar role. A guy that plays slot a majority of time, but also can slide out. There's a lot of similarities here that I could go into, and I could go on this all day. Keenan Allen ran a 4.7 140. Quintus Cephas ran a 4.7 240. He had issues with drops. But what Keenan Allen did well is he didn't have great top-end speed. Keenan Allen was a fantastic route runner. He had a lot of shiftiness. That's what it's all about. And he was aggressive. He would fight through contact. That's what it's about. And he was 6'2". So he was already a pretty big slot. You compare that to St. Brown, who was 6'1", nearly 200 pounds. Cephas, who's 6'1", over 200 pounds. Cephas ran a 4.72. Thing about St. Brown is he's actually fast. He ran a 4.5 140. But St. Brown has the background of playing slot, dominating from slot, and also playing on the outside. Keenan Allen was always the top go-to guy. And this is why I keep saying, hey, I think Amon-Ra St. Brown may have the most receptions out of any receiver as a rookie because if you look at a guy like Keenan Allen, his rookie season, he had over 100 targets. He had 71 receptions in his rookie season. He was a third-round pick. St. Brown was a fourth-round pick. Cephas, I think, would play really well from the slot. It's like what we talked about, being a big slot. But now that the Lions have a guy like Tyrell Williams to play big slot, he could do that if Tyrell, for whatever reason, is on the outside. But if Tyrell's in the slot, Cephas can also play on the outside because of his route running and his fast physicality and his size. He does have a lot of big plays. If great body adjustment. Cephas was proving this back in Wisconsin. I mean, he had huge games against Ohio State. Okuda said this was the toughest guy to guard. He was really good at Wisconsin. He was the guy in a passing offense that wasn't that great. But we even saw it last year. 10 yards per target, but also 13.2 yards before contact. All right, so a lot of his yards were coming before the catch. The guy had 20 receptions, but 350 yards. It was 17.5 yards per reception. He can absolutely play the outside receiver position. And a little bit like Keenan Allen, his 40 time was rough, but there were a lot of people saying that it should have been better than that. It should have been a better score than that. That's not a really good, fair gauge of how fast that he actually is. So he could easily play more of that outside role if he wanted to. Could have played the slot role, but if Tyrell's going to hold down a little bit more of that, cool, that's fine. That's fine with me. Let's see if he's playing more on the outside. But the good thing is now that if injuries do come up, you have guys that can move around and play different spots. Really going to open up these slot guys is the speed that you have on the outside. Let's say a team comes down with a cover 2 set. You know, they got a split safety look and you attack deep on the outside. All of a sudden, you're taking the safeties with you because I'm telling you, if you don't put a safety help over top of Brashad Perriman, he's gone. He's gone. Press or not, he's gone. And then on the other side, say you put Tyrell Williams on the outside, you let him go deep as well. Now you need safety help for size reasons because there ain't many 6'4" corners that can go up and attack the ball in the air like he can. So that's where you get issues because if you send both your safeties out and they fan out, it opens up the middle where you have all of a sudden linebackers are trying to cover these slot receivers over the middle. You got drags, you got crosses going on. People are like losing guys. They don't have the speed to keep up in man-to-man situations. Now you are forced to drop in a zone, and then you have that size to attack zone. And the Lions also have guys like Damian Ratley, who could line up on the outside. He's fast, he's tall. So you have the ability to mix things around. Like I said, that's based on matchups. What do you feel like you have here? And you can attack, but you can move all these pieces around. Whether guys are tired, health, you can move pieces around to open up other pieces of the field. That's why it's nice to have the speed, but also the size. Tyrell, he's going to play the Tyrell role, the same role that he played, outside, inside, matchup nightmare based on who we're playing. The Z receiver position, the big slot position, and he can play the X spot if you wanted him to. Who do I think is going to play and hold down the X role the most of the time? Actually, I think it's going to be Rashad Perriman. Now, I know it sounds weird, but the thing is with the X position is that you obviously need to have size. Perriman does at 6'2", 200 plus pounds. You got to have the speed. Perriman has more speed than anybody on this roster, more speed than most players in the league. But where Perriman's going to have an advantage here is that Perriman, when you're playing the X receiver position, a lot of times gets man-to-man coverage. But if you are a guy that is playing the X receiver position, you're not moving a lot. If you don't put a safety over top, he's going by. If you don't put some help over top for Perriman and you press, he's going by you. Good luck. If you don't press, then he can hit you with a quick hitter like the slants, the quick routes over the middle, anything like that, he can just do a quick hitter. So you're basically in a really lose-lose situation against Perriman if he's playing that X role, because if you press and you don't put help over top, he's going by. If you do put help over top, now you have a safety that's responsible for that area of the field, and that opens up everything over the middle. And that's when you hit a guy like Tyrell Williams across the middle, and guess what? You don't have deep help over the back. So it's up to the linebackers to stop a guy that ran a sub 4.5. How are you going to do that? There is not many corners that can stay in front of this guy. And he's been playing way more aggressive lately. He is great down the field. He's a deep threat. Definition of a deep threat, you're pushing 20 yards per reception. We did a video on him recently. Go check it out if you want. That guy, to me, can play the X role. A little bit like Tyrell, and some of the same matchups they're able to get putting Rashad inside because of his size and speed. The issue with Rashad is that he's not as crisp as a route runner. Now, he's improved, but he's not as crisp there yet. So for him, I think it's a little bit more limited. But if you're running drags, if you're running simple things over the middle, he could easily handle that. Some of the deeper ones, that's probably more Tyrell Williams speed. But because of his speed, you can get him in certain situations that you can just have him run up the seam. And we've seen that. We've seen him score touchdowns running up the seam, getting matchup against safeties and just running by them because they're flat-footed. He's just that fast. It's crazy how fast this guy is. But remember, slot is just inside that wide receiver. There could be multiple slots on the fields. And yes, they may have different labels, but there could be multiple slots. All right, so it's not just always one guy, especially if you're going to play a lot of spread. You're going to have a lot of receivers on the field, so you need this depth. And he's already been getting those in practice, we've heard. This is why you get guys that are 6'1", 6'2" everywhere, because they all can play different positions. That's what the Lions did. And there's so many similar pieces. Mike Williams did that when they drafted him. He was 6'4", he played the X role. It pushed a guy like Tyrell to finding that role inside. Having Khalif Raymond, who is that similar to? Travis Benjamin, who is 5'10", speedy receiver. He was kind of playing that Tavon Austin type of role. That's what I think a guy like Khalif Raymond could play. A guy that was ridiculously fast, who ran a sub 4.40, but much on the shoulder side, 5'9", but can be used in some weird ways, just like Victor Bolden. If Victor Bolden made the team, he's 5'8", kind of like a running back, kind of like a little bit of a hybrid there. That'd be the role that he plays. Antonio Gates, line up at receiver and tight end. That's TJ Hockenson. We just have a better one at the 8. Virgil Green, their tight end. We have Darren Fells. He was 6'5", ours is 6'7". Good luck. Running back, Melvin Ingram. I'm comparing him to Jamal Williams. Remember when Anthony Lynn said, hey, Jamal Williams is kind of like an aid back to me. A little bit bigger, a little bit more physical, runs between the tackles a little bit better, but can pass block. And this one's special because he can pass catch. That's what Melvin Ingram was lacking a little bit. But that's what Jamal Williams reminds me of. And Swift, Austin Eckler, very similar there as well. So you can just see by this alone, even if these aren't all exactly how it's going to play out, how the Lions have built very similar to what Anthony Lynn had going on with the LA Chargers. That's why this team is going to be tough, because when Dan Campbell says, hey, we're going to go based on matchups, he ain't lying. Tyrell Williams is a matchup nightmare, and he proved it. And Anthony Lynn brought it out of him. And now that guy's in Detroit. Good luck with that, because just playing outside receiver, he's going to be effective. Lions made themselves a very tough team to play man coverage against. You're gonna have to play a lot of zone because you have a lot of speed and you got a lot of size. That's really tough to match up with man-to-man coverage because you're going to get a lot of advantages a lot of times. The good thing with the size is going to be a lot easier to attack zones because you're going to make yourself a way bigger target, but you're just making yourself a really tough team to match up with man-to-man, and that really limits you defensively. And he was effective back in 2016. The guy they weren't even taking advantage of the ability for him to play slot like Anthony Lynn did. Because at the time, they didn't have Keenan Allen. They didn't have Mike Williams. So you're like, hey, you're the guy. You play outside receiver. Okay, I'll do that. and he had over 1,000 yards. He was putting up Galladay numbers. Then he showed off how special he is because they said, okay, hey, look, can you play slot for us? We got outside guys. Can we play slot 40+% of the time? Like, get out of here, bro. This dude, if he's healthy, that's going to be the factor. Can he stay healthy? Because he's aggressive. He plays physical. That's why he has shoulder injuries. He's got to stay healthy. That is the most important thing, and I'm hoping the fact that he had surgery on his shoulder means he will come back healthy and we'll be good to go. Because if he is, good luck, NFC North. Good luck.
Good luck.
Fun with that. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you, Pride, for watching, and I'm out.